As we sit right now, rumors are circulating that the United States might be about to finally run out of diesel fuel, with the energy crisis ramping up and impacting the United States across the pond and not just Europe as many people think. As it turns out, the amount of diesel fuel in the US that you can buy is at the lowest levels we've seen since the 2008 global financial crisis, and it's getting worse. If the situation continues to worsen, we could reach that tipping point where everything changes in an instant, with people unable to get to work, kids unable to get to school, and importantly, trucks unable to transport the millions of goods that move the American economy around every single day. Today, we will explain exactly what is happening, where it's likely to go, just what it means for your finances, your investments, and your money, and why in 20 days the US may have run out of diesel. Now, a couple of weeks ago, the Energy Information Administration reported that distiller inventories are at the lowest levels we've seen since 2008, the last real major recession we saw. Now, distillers is just a fancy word for diesel, jet fuel, and heating oil, but the focus here is on diesel. Unfortunately though, things are actually far worse than you would think just from those headlines, and worse than the situation was in 2008, because those previous lows were recorded in April of 2008, when these are recording right now, right when the demand for these distillates like diesel usually soars as farmers are harvesting crops and buying up extra fuel for winter. Now, you may have wondered why diesel prices haven't dropped as much as gasoline prices, or why Biden refuses to mention anything about diesel prices while he's running around claiming loads of credit for dropping the price of gasoline. And well, that's because the situation for diesel is sadly very different. Now, it is normal for demand and supply for diesel to vary throughout the year, but the variance we are seeing this year is far greater than usual, as the economy is on the edge and people are really uncertain about what's going to happen next. Another massive problem for the United States is they are refining less diesel right now than they used to in the past, because a bunch of refineries have been shut down over recent years and closed as the government tries to fight global warming by just importing their products from overseas instead of refining it stateside themselves. To make matters even worse, a bunch of refineries that are still active in the US have been shut down for their scheduled repairs, which just happens to occur at the worst possible time we can imagine. Then, finally, we have the issue with the war in Ukraine, as the United States used to import diesel fuel from Russia themselves, but that has been cut off entirely as a result of the sanctions the US placed on Russia. These missing imports are equivalent to about 700,000 barrels per day, and most of these imports were the refined products, so if these imports were still coming in, it would have seriously helped to put an end to this problem. Then we have this one final kick in the teeth, which is the fact that despite this massive shortage of diesel fuel, the United States is still exporting diesel to the rest of the world at a rate of about 1 million barrels per day, sending away much needed fuel right as the US gets closest to its tipping point. Now, that final point there is really infuriating for loads of people, and for very good reason, as it just screams of shooting oneself in the foot. So many people are asking why diesel fuel is still being sent overseas. Unfortunately here, the reason for this is just basic economics trumping what might be right or wrong. The companies in the US that are exporting diesel fuel are fully legally allowed to do it, and so by that measure they are doing nothing wrong, and morality isn't important to them at all. What matters is their bottom line and their profits. The simple fact is that they make more money by shipping this diesel overseas and selling it to other people than they do keeping it in the US and selling it to American customers. As always though, there are some government screw-ups contributing to the fact that it's more profitable for these companies to sell their diesel overseas. There is the Jones Act, which requires ships that sail from one American port to another to be crewed by Americans, which plain and simple makes it cheaper for a ship sailing from a Gulf Coast port to just go to South America or Europe as opposed to somewhere like New York. Another reason for some of these exports is that the United States requires certain qualities of the diesel that's to be sold in the US, and some of the diesel that's refined stateside does not meet those requirements, so they have to be sold elsewhere. But that obviously begs the question, is bad diesel at least better than no diesel at all? The easy solution for this whole problem from an American point of view is to just ban exports of diesel fuel in a crisis, which the US is definitely in, but that's a political issue and something that isn't even on the table right now. It would also create problems in the rest of the world by drying up supply in places like in Europe, but many Americans are quite rightly asking why their politicians aren't putting Americans first, as they so often claim to do. Now, if you've been paying attention to the markets, you've probably seen how badly stocks are performing this year, and you might be thinking about diversifying your portfolio, or maybe you just want to hedge against inflation, Well then, you need to hear about this video's sponsor, Vaulted. Now, Vaulted is the best way for individual or even institutional investors to acquire physical gold with a great website and mobile app that makes it easier than it's ever been. They store and insure their one-to-one allocated gold in the Royal Canadian Mint. It's all certified conflict-free, and you can rest easy in the knowledge that you can request instant physical delivery of your gold holdings whenever or wherever you desire. Their prices are the best in the market because they store all of their gold at the manufacturer, and so they cut out all unnecessary middlemen. They don't charge any premium or spread when buying or selling you gold, and they are as transparent as possible, meaning there are absolutely no hidden fees. On top of all that, they even managed to put out a load of really interesting content keeping you updated on the world of gold. Now, if that sounds at all interesting to you, then I highly suggest you check Vaulted out. There's a link for you all down below in the comments and the description. Again, that's Vaulted in the link down below in the comments and description. As of right now, the situation is really quite dire and it's getting worse. A fuel supply and logistics company called Mansfield Energy just recently issued an alert about this diesel shortage, and they've listed 10 different states that are already seeing this crisis in full swing, and apparently more are on the way. On October the 14th, the Energy Information Administration reported that the US only had 25 days left of fuel, which should have meant that the entire country went dry last week, but that obviously didn't happen, so an influx of supply came from somewhere, but we're not sure where. Biden has already been draining the United States Strategic Oil Reserve to try and drop gasoline prices prior to the midterm elections, which has left the US in a far more dangerous place than usual, especially since that Strategic Oil Reserve is supposed to ensure that the United States military can function and not help the president win an election. As of right now, the government is claiming that there is over 20 days left of diesel, and so it's really nothing to worry about, but the margins for error here are slim and the consequences would be disastrous. Logistics all across the country would instantly collapse, as it's almost all notably serviced by diesel-run trucks. Areas like the northeast of the country are already suffering and seeing delivery times soar and logistical issues crop up for many different companies. If businesses are unable to transport their goods, they're unable to sell them as well, and literally everything will grind to a halt. Restaurants won't be able to get their food and their staff will lose their jobs. Supermarkets will find them in a similar position, as will other stores which sell consumer goods. Unlike the pandemic, Amazon will be unable to come to the rescue because while they are electrifying much of their delivery fleet, that only applies to the last 10 miles or so of logistics, and getting the products to the massive warehouses is still almost entirely done with diesel fuel. At a time when the economy is already on a knife edge, this really would be catastrophic and would cause the economy to take a drastic turn for the worse, and I don't doubt at all that if this happens, the resulting recession would be far, far worse than that of 2008. The truth is that from the logistical point of view, there really isn't much that you can do here because we have no influence over these logistical systems. On a personal level though, just purely guaranteeing your personal and your family's security, there are a few options that we have, but they really aren't too great and would likely take time to implement, which you may not have. Now here's where I'm going to say something that many Americans are not going to like, but it does need to be said. Most of you don't need a pickup truck, and of those who do need one, well, most of them don't need an off-road capable vehicle, and of those who do, most of them don't need a vehicle as big as it is. Now I get it, I understand that it's nice to drive a big vehicle that gives this allure of safety, and it's nice to sit up high and see the whole road, but it really isn't necessary, and the fuel efficiency of vehicles in the US is really quite poor because of their size. Now, I'm not going to suggest that you buy a Toyota Aygo because no American is going to drive a tiny hatchback that was designed for an Italian ancient city, but maybe you don't need that great big Ford F-250 and you can do with a standard sedan instead. This doesn't mean you have to buy a Tesla or some other electric car, and it doesn't mean that you deserve to suffer from a diesel shortage if you choose not to make the switch to electric. God knows that that has its own problems right now, but it is an option and not something to be scoffed at. Of course, this is just a personal decision as well, and you probably would be 100% fine with a more fuel efficient car than you have. If this situation continues to get worse, if it actually evolves to that point of a gasoline drought, a diesel shortage in its entirety, then having one of these smaller, more efficient vehicles could really help out. Again, to clarify, I'm just merely putting the thought in your head. I'm not trying to force you to sell your truck or anything like that. And of course, just because there are some small things that you can do about this, that doesn't mean that it's your fault that this is happening. Part of the blame for this really does go to no one, just natural market forces that are very difficult to get around. Russian imports are lower than we've ever seen, and whether or not you think that's worthy of opposing the war in Ukraine is 100% a personal opinion, so I'm not going to tell you if that's right or wrong. Refineries having to do their maintenance and repairs is just an unfortunate stroke of luck and something that was always going to happen. It just ended up happening at the worst possible time. And obviously, much of the blame does go to the government officials who love to get in the way of the free market and its natural efficiency, and more often than not, cause more problems than they fix. The oil and gas industry has been stifled in America for a long time in favor of importing commodities that you have enough of within your own borders. And the stupidity of those politicians who pushed for this outsourcing of guilt is absolutely disastrous. You absolutely should hold your elected officials to account and make sure that you vote against the policies that you don't like, and don't get caught up in the tribalism and supporting a certain candidate or party because you've always supported that party. Hopefully things don't go the way they're looking is likely, but let's not live on hope. Be safe, be secure, be sensible, and as always, be stoic.